Hello, everyone. My apologies. One moment. This is a kitty cat. Move out of the way. Move out of the way. I'm going to move. I'm going to roll. Okay. We're going to close the curtain so you don't have to look at my water heater. And now I'm going to see if I can move this rolling chair here. It is November the 8th, 2019. And my apologies for taking so long to get back to reading this book. But today, I have not read this chapter since I was a kid. So we're going to do chapter 18 of The Yearling. So here we go. Chapter 18. August was merciless in its heat, but it was mercifully leisurely. There was little work to be done and no great hurry about the doing of that little. There had been rains and the corn had come to maturity. It was drying on the stalks and could be broken and could soon be broken for curing. Penny estimated that he would have a good yield, perhaps as much as 10 bushels to the acre. The sweet potato vines grew lushly. The Kaffir corn for the chickens was ripening, its long heads like sorghum. The sunflowers along the fence, also for the chickens, had heads as big as plates. The cowpeas were abundant. They made the staple food with the meat of some game almost every day. There would be a fine stand of cowpea hay for use through the winter months. The field of Pindars was not doing so well, but because of the killing by old Slewfoot of Betsy the brood sow, there were not many shoats to fatten. The Baxter hogs had come mysteriously home, with them a young brood sow. Its mark had been changed from the Forester mark to the Baxter. Penny accepted it as the peace offering for which it was intended. The red ribbon cane had made a fair stand. The Baxters looked forward to autumn and the frosts, when sweet potatoes would be dug, hogs butchered, corn ground into meal, and the cane would be ground and the juice boiled into syrup, and plenty would replace the meagerness. There was enough to eat, even now in the leanest season, but there was no variety, no richness, no comfortable feeling of ample reserve stores. They lived from day to day, with meal and flour and fat meat short, dependent upon Penny's chance shots at deer and turkey and squirrel. He trapped a fat possum in the yard one night and dug a mess of new sweet potatoes to roast with it for a special treat. It was an extravagance, for the potatoes were small and immature. The sun laid a heavy hand on the scrub and on the clearing. Ma Baxter's bulk suffered with the heat. Penny and Jody, lean and clean-limbed, felt the temperature only in an increasing reluctance to move rapidly or often. They did the chores together in the morning, milked the cow, fed the horse, chopped wood for cooking, brought water from the sinkhole, and then were through until evening. Ma Baxter cooked hot dinner at noon, then banked the fire on the hearth with ashes, and supper was cold, consisting of the noon surplus. Jody was conscious always of Fodder-wing's absence. Living, Fodder-wing had been with him in the back of his mind, a friendly presence to which he might turn in his thoughts, if not in reality. But Flag grew miraculously day by day, and that was comfort enough. Jody thought that its spots were beginning to fade, a sign of maturity, but Penny could see little change. It was unquestionably growing in intelligence. Penny said that the bears had the largest brains of any of the scrub animals, and the brain of the deer came next. Ma Baxter said, "This is too dat rattled smart," said Penny. And Penny said, "Why, Ma, shame on you for cussing," and winked at Jody. Flag learned to lift the shoestring latch on the door and come in the house at any hour of the day or night when he was not shut up. He butted a feather pillow from Jody's bed and tossed it all over the house until it burst, so that the feathers drifted for days in every nook and cranny and appeared from nowhere in a dish of biscuit pudding. He began to romp with the dogs. Old Julia was too dignified to do much more than wag her tail slowly when he pawed at her, but Rip growled and circled and pretended to pounce, and Flag kicked up his heels and flicked his merry tail and shook his head and finally, with impudence, leaped the slat fence and raced alone down the roadway. He liked best to play with Jody. They tussled and held furious butting matches and raced side by side until Ma Baxter protested that Jody was growing as lean as a black snake. In a late afternoon toward the end of August, Jody went with the fawn to the sinkhole for fresh water for supper. The road was bright with flowers. The sumac was in bloom, and the colic roots sent up tall stalks of white or orange orchid-like flowers. The French mulberries were beginning to ripen on slim stems. They were lavender in color, close clustered like snails' eggs along lily stalks. Butterflies sat on the first purple buds of the fragrant deer tongue, opening and closing their wings slowly as though waiting for the buds to open and the nectar to be revealed. The covey call of quail sounded again from the pea field, clear and sweet and communal. Sunset was coming a little earlier, and at the corner of the fence row, where the old Spanish trail turned north and passed the sinkhole, the saffron light reached under the low-hanging live oaks and made of the gray, pendulous Spanish moss a luminous curtain. Oh, I like that. Made of the gray, pendulous Spanish moss a luminous curtain. Jody stopped short with his hand on the fawn's head. A horseman with a helmet was riding through the moss. Jody took a step forward, and horse and rider vanished, as though their substance were no thicker than the moss. He stepped back, and they appeared again. He drew a long breath. Here, certainly, was Fodder-wing's Spaniard. He was not sure whether he was frightened or no. He was tempted to run back home, telling himself that he had truly seen a spirit. But his father's stuff was in him, and he forced himself to walk forward slowly to the spot in which the apparition had appeared. In a moment, the truth was plain. A conjunction of moss and limbs had created the illusion. He could identify the horse, the rider, and the helmet. His heart thumped with relief, yet he was disappointed. It would be better not to have known, to have gone away, believing. He continued on to the sinkhole. The sweet bay was still in bloom, filling the sinkhole with its fragrance. He longed for Fodder-wing. Now he should never know whether the mossy horseman in the sunset was the Spaniard, or whether Fodder-wing had seen yet another at once more or whether Fodder-wing had seen yet another at once more mystic and more true. He set down his buckets and went down the narrow trail that Penny had cut between the banks to the floor of the sinkhole long before he was born. He forgot his errand and lay down under the lacy shadow of a dogwood tree at the foot of the slope. The fawn nosed about, then lay down beside him. He could see from this spot the whole deep sunk bowl at once. The rim above caught the glow of the sunset, as though a ring of fires burned invisibly around it. Squirrels, quieted a moment by his coming, began to bark and chatter and swing across the treetops, frenzied with the last hour of day, as they were always frenzied with the first. The palm fronds made a loud rattling where they dashed through, but the live oaks gave almost no record of their passing. In the thick sweet gums and hickories, they were almost inaudible, always unseen, until they raced up and down the tree trunks or slipped to the edge of a limb to swing into another tree. Birds made sweet, sharp sounds in the branches. Far away, a redbird sang richly, coming closer and closer until Jody saw him drift to the Baxter drinking trough. A flock of turtle doves whirred in to drink briefly, then flew away to their roosting places in the adjoining pine forest. Their wings whistled as though their pointed gray and rosy feathers were thin knives to slash the air. Jody's eye caught a motion at the edge of the slope. A mother raccoon had come down to the limestone troughs, followed by two young ones. She fished the series of troughs carefully, beginning with a drinking trough at the upper level. He had the finest reason now for delaying. He would have to wait until the water had cleared and settled. The mother coon found nothing of interest in the troughs. One of the young clambered to the edge of the stock trough and peered in curiously. She slapped it away, out of danger. She worked her way down the slope. Now she was lost among the tall ferns. Now her black masked face appeared again between stalks of the Cherokee bean. The two young ones peered out after her, their small faces replicas of her own, their bushy tails ringed almost as decisively. She reached the seepage pool at the bottom and began to fish in earnest. Her long black fingers groped under fallen twigs and branches. She lay on her side to reach into a crevice for, no doubt, a crayfish. A frog jumped, and she made a quick circular pounce and waded back to the edge with it. She sat up on her hind legs and held it a moment, kicking against her breast, then sunk her teeth in it and shook it as a dog shakes a rat. She dropped it between her offspring. They pounced on it and snarled and growled and cracked its bones and finally shared it. She watched dispassionately a moment, then turned back into the pool. Her bushy tail was lifted just above the water level. The young ones waded out after her, their peaked noses lifted above the water. She turned and saw them and dragged them back to land. She lifted each one in turn and spanked its small furry bottom in so human a way that Jody had to clap his hand over his mouth to keep from shouting. He watched her for a long time, fishing and feeding them. Then she ambled leisurely across the floor of the sinkhole and up the far slope and away over the rim, the young ones following, churring and grumbling amiably together. The sinkhole lay all in shadow. Suddenly it seemed to Jody that Fodder-wing had only now gone away with the raccoons. Something of him had always been there, where the wild creatures fed and played. Something of him would always be near them. Fodder-wing was like the trees. He was of the earth, as they were earthy, with his gnarled, frail roots deep in the sand. He was like the changing clouds and the setting sun and the rising moon. A part of him had been always outside his twisted body. It had come and gone like the wind. It came to Jody that he need not be lonely for his friend again. He could endure his going. He went to the drinking trough and filled the buckets with as much water as he could carry and went home. He told at the table of the coons, and even his mother was interested to hear about the spanking. and no one questioned his delay. After supper, he sat with his father and listened to the hoot owls and the frogs and a far wild cat and still further foxes, and to the north a wolf that howled and was unanswered and was answered. He tried to tell his father the thing that he had felt that day. Penny listened gravely and nodded, but Jody could not make the words fit his feeling and could not quite make his father understand. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 18. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his peace. Bye, everyone.